The air was thick with cold and anticipation as Elias Marrow stood at the water's edge, clutching the worn leather-bound book Mara had insisted upon carrying. Beside him, Mara Lorne moved with deliberate care, setting down a bundle of herbs and carefully drawn sigils on the damp earth. Old Man Harbin, leaning heavily on his gnarled cane, began murmuring words that seemed older than the village itself, his voice a gravelly thread weaving through the night stillness. "This is it," Elias whispered, his voice trembling not from the cold but the weight of what was to come. "The last chance to turn back the tide." Mara nodded, her green eyes reflecting the moon's eerie glow. "If this fails, we lose everything." The ritual had been pieced together from fragmented lore and cryptic warnings. An ancient rite said to sever the bond between the cursed moon and the lake. Old Man Harbin's tales painted it as a desperate gambit, one that demanded both courage and sacrifice. Elias felt the burden of that truth settle over him like a shroud. He knelt, tracing the symbols in the dirt with trembling fingers, each line pulsing faintly as if alive. The herbs Mara had gathered moonwort, belladonna, and elderflower were arranged meticulously, their scents mingling in the crisp night air. Old Man Harbin's chanting grew louder, each syllable reverberating against the water, stirring ripples that glimmered with unnatural light. A sudden chill swept over Elias as the lake's surface began to churn, the once placid water roiling with an otherworldly force. Shapes flickered beneath the waves' faces, twisted in silent screams, shadows that danced just beyond perception. The lunar entity was awake, resisting. Elias's heart hammered as he reached into his pocket and pulled out the talisman, a carved piece of driftwood imbued with runes from the village elders. He raised it high, the moonlight catching on its worn edges, and then plunged it into the water with a sharp cry. A shockwave rippled outward, splashing cool spray onto their faces. The lake's surface convulsed violently, and for a moment, the entity's form lifted fluid and shifting, a grotesque amalgam of light and shadow, eyes like deep wells of madness. Elias felt its gaze pierce his soul, a silent challenge. "Hold steady," Mara shouted against the roar of the water. Old Man Harbin's voice rose, chanting faster, the firelight flickering wildly as if caught in a storm. The moon's reflection wavered, the hypnotic glow dimming as if the lake itself was drawing a breath. Elias stumbled back, chest heaving, sweat chilling on his skin despite the cold. The energy of the ritual seemed to drain from him, leaving a hollow ache in its wake. Yet the water calmed, the monstrous visage dissolving into ripples that caught the moonlight one last time before fading. "Is it over?" Mara asked, voice shaky but hopeful. Old Man Harbin shook his head slowly, eyes shadowed. "Not over, just delayed. The curse runs deep, rooted in this land and our history. But tonight, we have struck a blow." Elias swallowed hard, the weight of relief mingling with the knowledge that the battle was far from won. The moon's descent had paused, its light softened, but the ominous glow still lingered, a reminder of the darkness waiting beneath the surface. As the first faint stirrings of dawn colored the horizon, Elias looked back at the lake. The reflection shimmered quietly now, a fragile veil between reality and nightmare. He knew the coming days would test him and the village in ways they had never imagined. But for this moment, he allowed himself a breath of hope. "We'll fight," he said quietly, more to himself than anyone else. "We'll fight until the last light fades." And as the sun's first rays kissed the water, the moon's glow dimmed further, retreating but never gone, leaving a lingering promise of shadows yet to come. Elias Marrow stood ankle-deep in the cold water, the chill creeping through his worn boots and biting at his skin. His breath came in steady puffs, mingling with the mist rising from the lake's surface as the night air held a heavy silence, broken only by the gentle lapping of water against the shore and the distant call of a lone owl. Around him, the village of Glimmerhollow lay cloaked in darkness, windows shuttered, streets deserted, as if the entire town held its breath, waiting for what was to come. In his hands, Ilias clutched the ancient tome. Mara had brought him a fragile collection of yellowed pages scrawled with cryptic symbols and incantations, passed down through generations of village elders. The knowledge contained within was their last hope, a ritual to sever the bond between the lunar entity and the lake, to break the curse that had swallowed so many souls whole. But the price was steep. The ritual demanded a sacrifice, one that would draw from the very essence of the one who performed it. Ilias's gaze lifted to the moon's reflection, a rippling mirror fractured by the gentle waves. Within that shimmering light lurked the malevolent presence that had haunted Glimmerhollow for weeks, the entity that whispered madness and beckoned the unwary to their doom. Tonight, he would face it head-on. Behind him, a faint rustle alerted Elias to Mara's presence. She stood at the edge of the water, her dark hair framing a face taut with worry and determination. Her green eyes glimmered in the moonlight, fixed on the water as if trying to pierce the veil between worlds. "Are you sure you can do this, Elias?" she asked, her voice barely more than a whisper, carried away almost instantly by the night breeze. He swallowed hard, the weight of his past, of lost loved ones, pressing down on him. "I have too, for the village, for Jonas, for all of them." Mara nodded, stepping back to give him space. "I'll be here, whatever happens." Taking a deep breath, Elias opened the tome and began to chant the ancient incantation. The words felt foreign on his tongue, yet they resonated with a power that sent shivers down his spine. The lake responded. The surface began to glow with an eerie phosphorescent light that pulsed in time with his voice. Ripples spread out, distorting the moon's reflection into grotesque shapes and faces that writhed and shifted like living shadows. From the depths, the lunar entity stirred. Its fluid form rose slowly, a shifting mass of light and darkness that coalesced into a visage of nightmare. Twisted faces emerged, their eyes hollow and mouths stretched in silent screams. A chorus of maddening whispers filled the air, clawing at Ilias's mind, dredging up memories and fears he had long tried to bury. "You cannot win," the voices hissed, seeping into his thoughts. "Your soul will feed us. You will drown in madness." Ilias's knees buckled, and for a moment, the darkness threatened to engulf him. But a flicker of resolve sparked within, fueled by love and loss, by the faces of those he sought to protect. He gritted his teeth and pushed back against the tide of despair, focusing on the ritual's words. The lake's glow intensified, the water boiling around him as the entity lashed out, tendrils of shadow reaching to drag him under. Pain lanced through Ilias's chest, searing burn as if something inside him was being torn away. His vision blurred, colors bleeding and warping, but still, he chanted, voice rising over the cacophony of whispers. On the shore, Mara's eyes widened in horror and hope. "Hold on, Elias," she cried, her voice breaking the spell of silence. "You're stronger than this." A sudden surge of light burst from Ilias's position, a pillar of radiance that shattered the entity's form, sending waves of darkness tumbling back into the depths. The lake stilled, the surface smoothing as the moon's reflection regained its gentle shimmer. Elias collapsed to his knees, gasping for breath, sweat and water mingling on his brow. His heart pounded wildly, and his limbs trembled with exhaustion and pain. Mara rushed to his side, gripping his arm. "You did it," she whispered, tears glistening in her eyes. "You saved us." But Elias barely heard her. His mind swirled with fragments of memory and shadow, the edges of reality fraying. He knew this victory came at a terrible cost. The sacrifice had taken something vital from him, something that might never return. As he looked up at the moon, now hanging still and distant in the sky, Elias felt the fragile line between sanity and madness quiver beneath his skin. The battle was won, but the war for Glimmerhollow's soul was far from over. And in the depths of the lake, something stirred, waiting, watching, patient. The night held its breath once more. Elias's sacrifice was not merely a physical toll, it was a fracture within himself. The ritual's success had weakened the lunar entity, but as he lay on the damp earth, Mara's steady hands brushing water from his hair, he felt the creeping cold of something ancient and relentless gnawing at his mind. Shadows flickered at the corners of his vision, whispers slithered just beyond comprehension. "You're safe now," Mara assured him softly, her voice a balm against the storm within. "We'll get through this. Together." He wanted to believe her. He had to. But a part of him knew the sacrifice was only a beginning. The lake, the moon, the entity, they were bound in a dance older than memory. And Elias Marrow had just become a part of that terrifying rhythm. The village's fate rested on a knife's edge, and the coming dawn would test the limits of their courage and hope. As the first pale light of morning crept over Glimmerhollow, Elias closed his eyes, clinging to the fragile thread of consciousness. The moon had been fought back, but its hunger was far from sated. And so the story of sacrifice, madness, and the fading sky wove itself deeper into the night, promising that some shadows never truly fade. Elias Marrow stood at the water's edge, the cold biting through his threadbare jacket. But it was nothing compared to the chill that had settled in his bones over these long, harrowing weeks. The moon hung low tonight, a swollen orb distorted by the rippling water. Its shimmering reflection fractured and uneven. Tonight was their last chance. Tonight, they would try to break the curse that had devoured so much of Glim. Beside Elias, Mara Lorne crouched by a hastily constructed altar made from driftwood, bone, and salt-strewn cloth. Her dark hair clung to her damp forehead as she clutched an ancient tome, her green eyes flickering with a fierce determination tempered by exhaustion. The candlelight cast flickering shadows that danced across her sharp features, lending her an ethereal quality amid the gathering darkness. "We don't have much time," Elias murmured, his voice low but steady despite the turmoil inside him. "The moon won't stay this low forever. When it rises again, the entity will grow stronger." Mara nodded, her lips pressed into a thin line. "Then we do this right. No mistakes, no second chances." The village behind them was quiet, the usual sounds of night replaced by a heavy silence that pressed on their ears. The survivors had gathered in the square, faces pale and drawn, haunted by the losses they had endured, friends, family, neighbors swallowed by the lake's shimmering reflection. Sheriff Caltaine stood a little apart from the crowd, his arms crossed, jaw clenched tight. The gruff man who had once dismissed Ilias's warnings now watched with a mixture of awe and dread as the final confrontation unfolded. Elias lifted the old ritual knife, its blade catching the moonlight, and began the incantation Old Man Harbin had taught him. Words in a language long forgotten slipped from his lips, twisting and turning in the night air like a spell woven from desperation and hope. Mara joined in, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands, the ancient text filling the space between them with a tangible energy. Suddenly, the lake's surface convulsed violently, the water roiling as if alive with a malevolent force. From the depths emerged the shifting, fluid form of the lunar entity, light and shadow swirling together, faces and limbs flickering like cruel mirages. It reached toward them with tendrils of shimmering water, its presence a suffocating weight that threatened to drown their very sanity. "Hold steady," Elias shouted, struggling to maintain the chant as his vision blurred with tears and sweat. The entity's voice echoed in his mind, the whispering madness that clawed at the edges of his resolve. Mara's voice rose, unwavering, and the light from the altar flared. A sudden burst of brilliance that cut through the darkness. The entity screamed, a sound both human and monstrous, then began to dissipate, its form unraveling into shimmering droplets that fell like rain back into the lake. When the last ripple calmed, an eerie quiet settled over Glimmernoa. The villagers looked to the sky, where the moon, though still low, no longer pulsed with the same hypnotic menace. Yet the scars remained empty homes, shattered lives, and a community forever altered. Elias sank to his knees, the weight of victory pressing down with an unexpected heaviness. Mara knelt beside him, her hand finding his, a silent testament to their shared ordeal. Sheriff Caltaine approached slowly, his usual gruff demeanor softened by the gravity of what they had witnessed. "You did it," he said quietly, "but at what cost?" Elias met his gaze, eyes weary but resolute. "The cost is everything. But as long as we remember, as long as we stay vigilant, maybe, just maybe, we can survive what comes next." The moonlight shimmered faintly across the lake, a last, lingering reminder of the nightmare that had almost consumed them all. And though the night seemed to breathe with a fragile stillness, the shadows whispered that the darkness was never truly gone. As the survivors dispersed into the cold night, their footsteps echoing softly against the cobblestones, Elias remained by the water's edge, staring into the fading reflection. Somewhere beneath the surface, ancient secrets still stirred, and the fragile boundary between reality and nightmare was waiting for the next tremor of madness to break it open once more. The last light of the lunar descent flickered and faded, leaving Glimmerhollow in a silence that was both an end and a beginning. Elias Marrow stood at the water's edge, the chill of the morning air seeping through his worn jacket. His eyes were fixed on the lake's glassy surface, where the faint shimmer of the moon's reflection still lingered, fragile and fading. The world seemed hushed, as though holding its breath after the night's long ordeal. He felt the weight of silence settle around him, pressing against his ribs. The lake, once a source of life and livelihood, now held the memory of horrors too deep to forget. The moon, which had drawn them all into its eerie descent, was gone from the sky, but not from their minds. Elias's gaze drifted upward to the softening sky where stars began to pale in the growing light. The boundary between night and day, between nightmare and reality, felt thinner than ever. Behind him, the village was slowly waking. The echoes of the previous night's chaos still lingered in the cracked windows and scorched earth. The dock where so many had gathered was now a smoldering ruin, the scent of burned wood mingling with the damp morning air. Mara, Lawn, moved with purpose through the village hall, a makeshift sanctuary transformed overnight into a refuge for the wounded and the frightened. Her sharp eyes scanned each face, offering a steady hand and words of comfort. The herbal salves she applied carried not just their healing properties, but the unspoken promise of hope amid despair. "This will ease the pain," Mara said softly to a young woman whose hands trembled uncontrollably. "We're still here. We're still fighting." Her voice, calm and resolute, was a balm to those who had lost so much. Yet beneath her strength lay exhaustion, the heavy toll of nights spent searching and nights spent mourning. Sheriff Caltaine stood outside near the ruins of the dock, his broad shoulders hunched beneath a heavy coat. His gruff features were etched with lines carved from sleepless nights and the burden of leadership in a time no earthly authority could govern. He watched as villagers sifted through the wreckage, some silently weeping, others casting wary glances at the lake, as if expecting the water itself to reach out and claim them again. "We hold together," Caltaine muttered to himself, the words a mantra against the creeping fear. "Whatever this is, it ends with us." But even as he spoke, the doubt gnawed at him. The unnatural had pierced the veil of their reality, and though the moon had retreated, something remains, something that whispered in the depths and in the shadows of the mind. Inside his cabin, Elias sat alone, the flickering fire casting long shadows that danced across the worn walls. His hands trembled slightly as he held a faded photograph a moment, frozen in happier times. His wife's smile, warm and full of light, haunted him now more than ever. He traced the edges of the photo, the paper rough under his fingertips, and closed his eyes. Memories surged, laughter on sunlit mornings, the feel of her hand in his, the unspoken promise of forever, all shattered by loss. Why did it have to come to this? He whispered into the darkness. A sudden chill crept through the room, and for a moment, the shadows seemed to pulse with a life of their own. The boundary between nightmare and reality trembled, threatening to swallow him whole. But Elias gritted his teeth, gripping the photograph tighter. "I won't let it win," he vowed, even as the moon's lingering influence clawed at the edges of his sanity. Outside, the village began the slow, painful process of healing. The sky lightened, but the scars both visible and invisible would remain. Mara's steady hands and Sheriff Caltaine's newfound resolve were threads of strength woven through the fragile fabric of survival. Yet, as the morning sun rose higher, Elias knew the true battle was far from over. The moon might have eaten the lake, but its shadow stretched long, a lingering darkness that would test the very souls of Glimmerhollow's people. In the silence of the aftermath, hope flickered tenuously, a fragile light in the gathering gloom. And somewhere, beneath the surface, the reflection waited. The moon, once a colossal orb, sinking nightly into the black mirror of the lake, was slowly retreating, climbing back into the sky with a hesitant grace. Yet, its glow was not the same. It felt thinner, more fragile, like a candle flickering against a gathering wind. The water beneath Elias's gaze rippled softly, as though breathing faint echoes of the vanished. Whispers of the souls the lunar reflection had claimed still lingering just beneath the surface. Elias's eyes, heavy with exhaustion and lingering fear, traced the moon's slow ascent. His mind wandered back to the chaos that had gripped Glimmerhollow in recent weeks, the disappearances, the hallucinations, the creeping madness that had clawed at the edges of his sanity. Though the village was quiet now, the silence was not peaceful. It was a fragile stillness, stretched thin by memories too raw to fade. Behind him, footsteps approached softly along the path. Mara Lorne emerged from the shadows, her tall frame silhouetted against the early light. Her dark hair was tousled by the lake breeze, and her piercing green eyes held a grim determination that had grown stronger with each passing day. She carried a small satchel of herbs and ointments, a token of her role as the village's healer and historian. "The moon's climbing," she said quietly, standing beside Elias. "But I wonder if it's really leaving us, or just watching, waiting." He nodded, never turning from the lake. "It's like the lake itself is holding its breath, like it knows this isn't over." Their shared silence held the weight of unspoken fears. The villagers had begun to stir from their shock, but the wounds, both visible and unseen, still festered. Mara's knowledge of herbs and old lore had helped many, but no salve could mend the shattered trust or the creeping dread that still clouded the village's spirit. Later that morning, inside the village hall, Mara moved among the gathered survivors with practiced care. The room was filled with muted conversations, the scent of dried herbs mingling with the faint chill still lingering from the night. She knelt beside a young woman nursing a pale hand, applying a soothing poultice with steady fingers. "You're safe here," Mara murmured, her voice soft but firm. "We'll get through this, together." The woman's eyes glistened with tears, a mixture of relief and sorrow. Around them, others sat quietly, their faces etched with exhaustion and haunted memories. The village was slowly stitching itself back together, but the fabric of their lives was frayed and uncertain. Meanwhile, Sheriff Calton patrolled the near-empty streets as twilight deepened. The once bustling village had grown eerily quiet, windows shuttered against the chill and fear that still clung to the air. His heavy boots echoed on the cobblestones as he paused beneath a flickering lantern, his gaze drawn toward the shimmering lake beyond the trees. For weeks, he had resisted the whispers of the supernatural, clinging to rational explanations for the horrors that had unfolded. But now, standing alone beneath the rising moon, the rational walls he'd built felt fragile. The line between skepticism and belief blurred with every shadow cast by the moonlight. His breath misted in the cold air as he muttered, "What have we really been fighting?" As evening fell, Elias and Mara convened in his modest cabin, a sanctuary cluttered with fishing gear, worn books, and faint traces of smoke curling from the hearth. The fire crackled, casting flickering shadows that danced across their faces. They spoke in low tones, sharing memories of the lost Jonas Marrow, Mara's brother, and the others who had vanished into the lake's reflection. Old Man Harbin's cryptic warnings echoed in their minds, reminding them that the ancient curse that had awakened with the moon's descent might never fully fade. "We were lucky," Mara said, her voice weighted with sorrow. "But lucky isn't the same as safe." Elias clenched his fists, the familiar sting of grief flaring anew. "We have to keep fighting, for the village, for those still here." Their resolve hardened even as uncertainty gnawed at the edges. The village of Glimmerhollow had survived the worst of the lunar terror, but the scars it bore were deep. The moon's influence, though diminished, lingered like a shadow refusing to be banished. Outside, the night deepened, and the moon hung high, its pale light casting long, wavering reflections on the lake's surface, fading echoes of a nightmare that might one day return. "We watch," Elias whispered, eyes fixed on the shimmering water, "and when the moon calls again, we'll be ready." But as the wind stirred the surface and the village settled uneasily to rest, an unspoken question lingered in the air. Had the curse truly been broken, or merely held at bay, waiting for the darkness to rise once more? The fragile peace of Glimmerhollow hung by a thread, caught between hope and the haunting possibility that the moon's hunger was far from sated.